You know, the role of a caregiver can be thrust upon you suddenly without warning, or it can be a role you take on willingly out of commitment, love, and devotion. Either way, long-term caregiving can take a heavy toll. We're talking about hope for the caregiver next on Significant Insights. Hello, welcome to the program. Good to have you. You know, there are approximately 75 million baby boomers in America, and they're getting older every year, which means as this large group of Americans ages, there's going to be an increasing need for caregivers. But caregiving isn't really only needed by the aging. Disabled children, wounded veterans, and adults of all ages can find themselves in need of caregivers. When the caregiver is a loved one who is making a lifelong commitment, usually without pay, meeting that daily special need of the relative often comes at great personal cost. No one knows this more than Peter Rosenberger, who has cared for his wife Gracie for over 30 years. He's the president of the Christian outreach Standing with Hope and the author of the book Hope for the Caregiver. Several years ago, we featured Gracie's story on our series Aspiring Women. And here are some clips from that program to illustrate how Peter ended up in his role as a caregiver.
1983, it was my first semester at Belmont College, and I'd come up from Florida, where I'm from, and I had spent the whole semester just really thinking that really 3 hours a night of sleep was fine, and that I was pretty much immortal, that nothing would happen to me. And I just wanted to go and see a friend and meet her in Little Rock, Arkansas, and she was in Dallas, and it was at the end of the semester, right before finals, and my parents kind of sensed that I was too tired to go on the trip, and they called me 2 times before I left and said, you know, we really think you just shouldn't do this trip, that you're too tired. And I said, nothing's gonna happen to me. And I said those very words, and got in the car and prayed over the trip before I got in the car, and an hour and 45 minutes out, I fell asleep, and the truck drivers that were around me on the interstate, it was on I-40, said I just put my head down on the wheel and I hit a cement abutment about 72 miles an hour, and thank God I didn't hit anybody else. It is a miracle that I'm alive. My heart stopped 4 times, and one time when I was in the car, and somebody was there and restarted it, the truck driver said. I mean, he got halfway into the car and got it going again. I immediately went into shock. The truck drivers, there were 10 of them that pulled me over. That pulled over and got their fire extinguishers out because the engine had started to catch fire, and I was trapped in the car. So they got the ambulances there and the paramedics and everything, and they had to use the jaws of life to get me out. And when they got me out, they took me to a local hospital that was near there, and they just said they couldn't do anything, and the paramedics made them start blood. By the time I got to Nashville, though, to St. Thomas Hospital, my blood pressure was 40/20. The biggest thing was all the internal injuries, and I had internal bleeding and stuff, so they wanted to make sure that I was going to live. The legs were just, broken bones. That was just a secondary thing, and we didn't even start really working on the legs until I was conscious. I had 52 broken bones and multiple compound fractures, and back broken, and my left side of my hip was crushed, and I was in traction. I was in tons of pain, and I woke up with my mouth wired together, not realizing that I had fallen asleep, what had happened. And the only conscious memory I can't remember seeing, but I remember hearing one of the truck driver's voices. Actually, he came even to visit me in the hospital. I remember this voice trying to say, what is your name? What is your name? Don't go to sleep, don't go to sleep, where are you from? Trying to get information, just try to keep me awake. I remember seeing flames, and I knew I couldn't move because I remember trying to move. You know, it's like having a dream and trying to run in a dream. It's like, what is the matter? I'm in slow motion. And so I remember thinking, I need to get out of here. This is on fire. This may sound crazy, I don't care. I remember looking in the flames, and the last thing I remember, I don't know if I said it out loud or if I just said it, I thought it, but I just said, Jesus, only you can get me out of this. You know, I've gotten myself into something I cannot get out of myself. I just thought anything could be better than losing a limb. So I just tried everything. We tried fusion after fusion, and I mean, most of my surgeries have been orthopedic. And in '91, I was in so much pain that I was crawling. I mean, you know, I had a toddler who was learning to walk, and I was crawling from room to room. I mean, it hurt too much to even use a cane or a walker or anything. At that point, my doctor just said, there's no other surgery we can do. He just said, look, when you're ready, you just call me and say, I can't handle the pain anymore. So I went back and I called my doctor and I said, let's just go ahead and take it. And I was terrified. And he said, I tell you what, why don't you go down to this place called Nashville Orthotics and Prosthetics. I toured the facility and saw that, oh my goodness, they're not making wooden legs anymore. I mean, they're making some state-of-the-art things. I took those first few steps, and I mean, you know, Peter was there, and it was terrifying, but you know, those were some of the most freeing steps I've ever taken, you know, all to come to the conclusion that I had to get freedom back. I had to lose, you know, that leg. And then in '95, I ended up having to lose the left one.
Tell us about your journey as a caregiver.
I mean, I knew I was going to marry her the day I met her. And it took a lot of convincing on her part, but just a beautiful young woman. She'd had about 20 operations by the time I met her. And I had no clue what it meant to be like, be in a relationship with somebody who suffers. I just saw this extraordinary individual, and I heard her sing for the first time. And when Gracie sings, I mean, Gracie has a no kidding voice, and it was captivating to me. But I jumped into this thing with no clue, armed only with a goofy sense of humor, a few smarts, and a lot of love for this woman. But it wasn't enough. I needed more, but I didn't know how to ask for more. I didn't know what more looked like. And so now I'm taking it on this mission to reach my fellow caregivers with a lifeline of what more looks like. My organization is Caregivers with Hope. That is not hearts and rainbows and unicorns and lucky stars and leprechauns. That is the conviction that we as caregivers can live a calmer, healthier, and dare I even say it, a more joyful life, even while looking at grim realities.
Yes, speak to that. I mean, joy is important, but let's talk about what you deal with on a regular basis.
Well,
suffering, loss.
Those things are unavoidable in life at some level. Maybe not on the level that Gracie has, but on some level, those things are unavoidable. Everybody's going to experience pain and suffering and loss. Mm-hmm. Misery is a choice. Joy is a choice. Pain is unavoidable. So we can be as miserable or as happy as we want to be. You know, I have found that even in the most outrageous moments of suffering, Gracie and I have had very tender moments with each other, and I can grind my teeth and be just hacked off while changing a dressing, or I can be weeping in doing it. Either way, it's my choice on how I'm going to respond to that and be tender in it or just be hacked off in it.
What are some of the darkest feelings you've had?
Oh, I went down some very dark roads. I went into moral failures. Name it. If you're feeling it as a caregiver, I failed at it. My successes have been astonishing. My failures have been epic. And so self-justification, I deserve this, entitlement, all this resentment, bitterness, name it. You can't take care of a suffering human being for 30 years and not go through that.
How do you help yourself push back?
I don't help myself push back. That's why we have Jesus. I have a Savior. I'm not that Savior. Every day I look down at my hands and I don't see nail prints. So therefore, that's a good sign. And I'm not Gracie's Savior either. And I learned to put my scared hand into his scarred hand and recognize, oh, wait a minute. I can't do this on my own. And I think this is the problem we caregivers have. We recklessly hurl ourselves at trying to take care of something, and then it consumes more of us than we have. And it empties us out. So then we will, out of just desperation, we'll turn to alternative sources to help replenish ourselves, but we're probably drinking out of the sewer at that point.
When we come back, Peter gives practical advice for caregivers on how to stay healthy, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. We'll be right back.
If I go down what happens to my wife? If I'm not in a good place emotionally, physically, financially, what happens to her?
Welcome back. Today, TLN President Deborah Fraser is talking with Peter Rosenberger about his book, Hope for the Caregiver. Now, Peter knows this subject better than most because for over 30 years, he has cared for his wife, Gracie, who suffers with the ramifications of a severe car accident she had when she was 17. To date, Gracie Rosenberger has had at least 78 operations, multiple amputations on both legs, including revisions, treatment by more than 60 physicians in a dozen hospitals, 7 different insurance companies, and medical costs of $9 million. Let's continue with what Peter calls his Delta doctrine.
You said you learned the greatest lesson from a flight attendant.
Well, I was flying out of Delta one day, everything leaves through Atlanta on it. And so that's what Delta stands for. And when they came on and said, hey, put your mask on first, if in case we have turbulence and we lose air pressure. And I thought, they're not telling you how to open those peanuts, which are surprisingly hard to open. I mean, I'm like, and they go everywhere. They're not telling you how to use that atomic suction device known as a toilet. They figured we're going to figure that thing out. But they remind us every single time to put our mask on first. Why? Because it's counterintuitive. We try to hold our breath and help a vulnerable loved one. Mm-hmm. And I thought, that's the life lesson for caregivers. That's it. That is what we deal with. We are trying to hold our breath while taking care of someone. And I have a simple question for caregivers. How long can you hold your breath?
So practically speaking, what does it look like to put your mask on first?
I came up with something so simple because, it's me. I got to do simple things. Caregivers don't need a 12-week course on stress. I heard some guy in Florida was offering that one time, like how to deal with caregiver stress, and it went on for like a couple of months. I thought, are you out of your mind? We need something that goes on for like 12 seconds. And so I came up with WWW. I'm from the South, so I say W. WWW. Wait, water, walk. Caregivers live in these from flashpoint to flashpoint of the emotional dynamics, not just with the loved one they're taking care of, maybe the family members that come in and they want to get all in the business, or maybe it's a doctor, whatever. Wait, water, walk. Don't automatically start speaking when something happens, when a flashpoint happens. If there's some type of argument getting ready to happen or whatever, just wait. Bite your tongue and learn to like the taste of blood. Have some water, drink to think. Fill your mouth up with something besides words. Don't speak. And then if it gets really crazy, just take a quick walk and just bleed that stress off. That's the initial steps of what I call the Delta doctrine, because it's just something simple to remember in your mind when it gets crazy. These emotional flashpoints are brutal. It's not the triage, the medical triage that I'm dealing with here. If Gracie goes into a seizure, okay, that's a medical thing. We're not having a relationship conversation when she's seizing. If she's bleeding out or coding or whatever, I got to get her to the ER. That's a medical issue. We're not talking about the relationship. The grind for caregivers is in the relationships, not necessarily with that loved one either. My brother and his wife have a daughter with cerebral palsy. She's 27 years old. She's got cognitive impairments of about like a 2-year-old. So she's 27. Well, they're not having the same kind of normal relationship dynamics with her, but they get them with a lot of other people who want to somehow give them advice on how to take care of their daughter. And that's the issue that you have as a caregiver. So many people want to offer their opinion into situations, and caregivers feel at their mercy. Or churches, pastors that come in, and people would say, if you had enough faith, Jesus would heal you. Yeah. Well, there are 3 kinds of people in this world: wolves, sheep, and sheepdogs. I'm a sheepdog. I'm a sheepdog for my fellow caregivers because I don't want any other caregiver to hear that again. I want caregivers to know that God has not abandoned them. The valley of the shadow of death is a long valley sometimes, but He said He will walk with it through us. Walk us through it. And He's not going to abandon us, and He hasn't. And this is not a sign of God's judgment. It's a sign of this broken world we live in. But that's the reality of it. And so what I'm trying to do is help caregivers learn how to protect their own heart, keep themselves healthy, not for selfish reasons. It's not selfish. If I go down What happens to my wife? If I'm not in a good place emotionally, physically, financially, what happens to her? I've been in bad places, and it darn near took her down even further. She is better served and better loved when I'm in a healthy place, because healthy caregivers make better caregivers.
What do you do to stay healthy?
I do several things. I spend a lot of time at the piano just for my own emotional release. That works out the kinks of my soul. I go to my church and play, and it just kind of helps me work through that. I take time for stillness, because if you don't take time for stillness, you're going to have to make time for illness. I mean, you just write that down. I made that up. That's pretty clever. I do martial arts. I just got my black belt recently, and I push myself. I mean, I'm a little bit old to be getting flipped over, but I do, and it's kind of thunderous when I land on the mat, but I do, because I mean, I got too heavy. I mean, I gained a lot of weight. I had to put on my belt with a boomerang. I mean, it took 2 dogs to bark at me. I don't want to be that way anymore. So I want to push myself physically to stay healthy. I try to watch what I eat. I go to sleep at the regular times. I spend a lot of times with the support groups. I go at least 2 to 3 times a week to a support group. And that is so important to me, just to listen to other people deal with their journey. And I have a whole list of things that I do. And somebody asked me one time, I was talking to a caregiver of a wounded warrior up at Fort Campbell recently. And she said, how do you find time for these things? I said, I don't find time. I take time.
Make time.
I have to do this because I will serve her better if I do. She needs me for the long haul.
Why does the word obligation need to be redefined?
Because it is a petri dish for resentment. I mean, it takes that long before you go from feeling obligated to just resenting the person you're doing this for. And here's how you know if you're dealing with obligation. I gotta, I need to, I should have, I would have, and you push yourself with these unreasonable demands that I don't know who's putting them on us.
So you have experience with that.
There's very little I don't have experience with. I mean, you can cram a lot in 30 years, and it's hard to push a wheelchair with clenched fist. That's what obligation leads you to, and it may not be obligation to that loved one. It may be obligation to family or whatever.
Because you love Gracie.
I adore this woman, and yet I have done terrible things in my life, but I adore this woman. And I realized I had my own train wreck, and I had my own dysfunction, and God had to reach into the miry pit, as David said, and bring me out and put me on a solid place.
The 3 L's.
The 3 L's: laughter, and I love to laugh. I watch funny movies. I listen to stand-up comedy. I name it. I have an app that delivers "Your Mama's So Fat" jokes to my phone just to make me laugh. Leave. Get away. You know what? It's okay to get up and move around the country. You may be able to get away for a little short amount of time, but you got to get away. And leisure. Have some fun. I mean, do something that's relaxing to you. It's leisure. Laugh, leave, and leisure are the 3 L's that I live by. And leisure can be just going to spend some time alone, being quiet, and just not taking care of anybody for a while. Like I said, I go at the piano and play.
So your costs have been over $9 million. How do you deal with finances in that circumstance?
Well, insurance companies are challenging. I've never lost an appeal. I've had 2 that doctors stopped on because it was taking so long, but I've never lost one once I got involved. It's not that complicated. It's challenging, but it's not that complicated. And it's not the issue I think that a lot of caregivers deal with the most. You would think it would be medical insurance, but I don't think it is. I think it's assurance.
What is the role that the church plays?
Well, that's where it speaks to the assurance. I think the church can do a couple of things. One of them is I think it can help connect up caregivers in the congregation to qualified financial counselors, CPAs, and so forth to help caregivers stay on a budget. Maybe somebody's taking over the family budget now that hasn't had any experience with it, and they don't know how to make sure their taxes are paid or whatever. There are people in the church that can help with that. That's a great way for pastors to connect caregivers to make sure everything's being done okay. And then speaking to that assurance. Speak with conviction, with specific conviction of why we can rest knowing that God is moving this thing. One of the things I live by is if He is Lord at all, He's Lord of all. The sovereignty of God has caused a lot of people to have theological pretzels in their lives. You know, they just kind of get all twisted up in that. It's very comforting to me because I have a Savior who is Lord of all, and it's being worked out right in front of my eyes. Maybe not as fast as I would like, maybe not the way I would like, but He didn't ask me to be a consultant. So I go back to that assurance thing, and we speak the gospel into these situations with conviction, not just paint it with, well, God obviously has a plan or you wouldn't be here. Well, that's just goofy. That's the consolation of speculation. You know, oh, I don't want to hear that. Or, you know, well, we'll pray for you, brother. Well, that doesn't mean anything to me either. What are you going to pray for? You going to pray for legs to grow back? You know, it's like going to the post office, see some guy with a bunch of boxes, and you say, well, brother, you look to be burdened down. I'm going to pray for you. Well, hold the door while you do it. You know, I mean, we can do better as that as the church. We can speak with great conviction, and we can say, you know what, I'm at the grocery store. Can I bring you a gallon of milk?
Yeah.
And then you show up and you say, here's a verse that I have in mind for you today. I just want to leave this with you. I wrote out a prayer on how to pray for caregivers in the book. Go over there and clean the caregiver's gutters. Don't let a caregiver get on the roof. And as you do that, that's a chance to minister the gospel.
To find out more about Peter and his ministry, get the book Hope for the Caregiver and find other valuable resources through the website caregiverswithhope.com. Final thoughts on caregiving right after this.
If you're taking care of somebody who is impaired, whether through narcotics, disease, trauma, alcohol, addiction issues, or just having a bad day, they're not doing it to you. They're just doing it. You don't have to go to every fight that you get a ticket to. You don't have to take everything so personally.
Welcome back. Today, Peter Rosenberger reminded caregivers that they really won't be any use to their loved ones if they burn themselves out physically, spiritually, emotionally, and financially. He gives some concluding comments and encouragement on where his own caregiving journey has taken him in today's final thoughts.
What is the most important message you would like to give to caregivers?
If you're taking care of somebody who is impaired, whether through narcotics, disease, trauma, alcohol, addiction issues, or just having a bad day, they're not doing it to you. They're just doing it. You don't have to go to every fight that you get a ticket to. You don't have to take everything so personally. It's much easier to care for someone when you are plugged into the inexhaustible love of God that frees you to love freely without expecting anything in return. That's what love is. If you start wanting something back and demanding it back, it's only a matter of time before you burn out and you take people down with you. But when you recognize that you have a Father who has lavished love on you, that it frees you to love from a free heart. And sometimes you're going to bite your tongue, and sometimes you're going to swear under your breath. Go back to your Father for that.
Would you do this all again?
Every bit of it. Every bit of it. I like the way I play the piano. I like the way I write. I like the way I communicate. I hate how I got here, but I would not trade what God has allowed me to see and do and experience in this for anything.
I like what Peter said when we talked about whether or not, if he had it to do all over again, he would go through this again. And he said yes, because it's made him a better person. You know, the Bible talks about the trials and tribulations that we go through. In fact, in a number of places in the New Testament, in the epistles, it talks about the importance of trials and tribulations. And all of us will go through trials and tribulations, perhaps not near as difficult as what Gracie and Peter have gone through. But somewhere in our lives, we all go through difficult times. And it's during those times that we can grow. The mountaintop experiences are wonderful, but it's in the valley, it's in the heat of the valley that there is real spiritual growth. One other thing, if you have a friend, someone who may be a caregiver going through a difficult time, remember to pray for them. Be sensitive to their needs. Make sure they know that you're aware and that you care. Thanks for joining us. God bless you. See you next time.